In the history of England, few women were as alluring, as controversial, and as brutally destroyed as Anne Boleyn. She was the one who made Henry VIII burn all ties with the Pope, changing the entire religion of the kingdom. But she was also the one who was sent to the scaffold after only 3 years as queen. Anne Boleyn left behind a great legacy, her daughter Elizabeth I, the legendary Queen of England. But before that happened, Anne's life was surrounded by bizarre rumours, filthy accusations, and truths that left later generations both shuddering and haunted. From whispers that she had an extra finger, to being accused of adultery with her own brother, from Henry's adoring gaze turning into a death sentence, to the chilling details of her execution day, all turned Anne Boleyn into the tragic symbol of the Tudor dynasty. And in today's video, we will explore 8 of the most shocking and strangest facts about Anne Boleyn, the woman whom history first glorified and then ruthlessly destroyed. Fact 1. The rumour of the extra finger and the ghost of a witch in the Tudor court. In the blood-stained and conspiratorial pages of the Tudor dynasty, there was a persistent whisper about Anne Boleyn, the woman who shook the throne of England. The rumour claimed that Anne had a deformity on her hand, perhaps an extra finger or a strange growth on her left hand. It might sound harmless, but in the context of 16th century England, where faith and superstition intertwined, this was not merely a physical flaw. It became the mark of the devil, evidence to turn the Queen into a witch in the eyes of the public. Foreign ambassadors at the Tudor court, especially those loyal to the Pope, often whispered in letters back to Rome that Anne was not as perfect as a queen should be. Some records hinted that she hid her hand with gloves or always chose long sleeves to cover it. This only fueled the curiosity of the people. Her enemies at court, particularly the supporters of Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, immediately exploited this detail to bring Anne down. At feasts, where wine loosened tongues, nobles would whisper, "She is a witch. She has an extra finger to cast charms and bewitch the king." In medieval Europe, any sign of difference on a woman's body was branded as sorcery. A mole, a strange scar, or an unusual hand, all could be turned into proof of dark powers. In the collective imagination, Anne Boleyn ceased to be an ordinary woman. She became someone who used beauty and witchcraft to control Henry VIII, making him abandon the Pope, sever ties with the Vatican, and establish a church of his own. The atmosphere in the Tudor court was thus thick with suspicion. Some of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting even swore they had seen Anne whispering in the dark, holding a strange charm. The rumours had no evidence, but they were deeply dangerous. For as time went on, the obsession with Anne the Witch sank deeper into the public mind, turning her from a symbol of love into a threat to the entire dynasty. In reality, modern historians believe Anne never had an extra finger, and that this rumour only appeared in writings after her execution. Clearly, it was a form of 16th century media warfare, smearing the image of a dead woman to legitimize the sentence against her. But true or false, the power of rumour was overwhelming. It made Anne's death not only a political execution, but also a supposed purge of witchcraft, cloaked in sanctity. Imagine this in the execution yard. As Anne knelt beneath the cold steel blade, many in the crowd believed they were witnessing the destruction of a witch, not of a queen. It was the king's victory over dark forces, a sign of a dynasty purified, and in that moment, truth or fiction no longer mattered, for Anne Boleyn had been forever drowned beneath the ghost of malicious whispers. This strange fact reveals a tragedy sometimes. It is not the sword that kills a queen, but the whispers in the dark. Fact 2. The rumour that Anne Boleyn had 3 breasts, when the body became a political weapon. Scattered records from the 16th century show that some of Anne's rivals spread the claim that she bore within her the mark of the Reggae, devil, an extra breast. In the superstitious beliefs of the time, a woman with 3 breasts was a sign of sorcery, The third breast was believed to be the devil's mouth, used to nourish dark spirits. Some even embroidered the tale further, claiming that from this extra breast, Anne drew her seductive power to bewitch Henry VIII, turning him into a puppet in her hands. In the shadows of palace corridors, these rumours only grew. People whispered that Anne always wore thick, closed gowns not merely to preserve modesty, but to conceal a grotesque deformity. Some of Catherine of Aragon's loyal ladies-in-waiting even maliciously swore they had seen strange marks while attending her. Of course, there was no evidence, but in a court where truth was woven out of words, such oaths were enough to plant fear. Henry VIII, who had once adored Anne so deeply he defied the Pope, gradually became swayed by these very rumours. When Anne failed to bear a son, enemies whispered that it was because she was not a normal woman, but a half-human, half-demonic creature. Her failure to secure the succession inadvertently became evidence to reinforce the bizarre tale of the third breast. The frightening thing is this: such rumours did not only destroy Anne's reputation, but also turned her death into a kind of exorcism in the eyes of the people. When Anne mounted the scaffold, many believed they were not merely witnessing the execution of a queen, but the eradication of a witch. And through this belief, Henry VIII and the Tudor court legitimized their ruthless act. Today, historians agree that the story of Anne having 3 breasts was entirely slander, a product of psychological warfare within the court. Yet the persistence of the rumor reflects a harsh reality in an age when women were treated as political tools. Their very bodies could be turned into weapons to destroy them. Anne Boleyn, once a symbol of beauty and intelligence, was twisted into a grotesque image simply because she stood at the center of power. Perhaps the most tragic element does not lie in the truth or falsehood of the 3 breasts, but in the fact that history left Anne Boleyn with an indelible legacy, a woman crushed by love, ambition, and malicious whispers. Fact 3. Accused of adultery with her own brother George Boleyn. If the rumours about an extra finger or 3 breasts were merely tools to spread disgust, then the third accusation against Anne Boleyn truly became the fatal blow: adultery with several men, including her own brother George Boleyn. This was not only a sin in the eyes of the Church, but also an act of treason under Tudor law, for the Queen was considered the property of the King, and any betrayal equaled rebellion. The context at that time was extremely tense. In the year 1536, Anne had failed to bear the son that Henry VIII longed for. The only surviving child was Elizabeth, a girl. The king's patience was running out. While supporters of Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, and Jane Seymour, his new mistress, were eagerly seeking to overthrow Anne. In this political climate, thick with intrigue, Thomas Cromwell, Henry's close advisor, realized that there was only one way to eliminate the Queen fabricate accusations that could not be denied. And so a series of charges were brought forth. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men at court, including the musician Mark Smeaton, the knight Henry Norris, and most shocking of all, George Boleyn, her own brother. Dragging her brother into the case not only added weight to the charges, but also planted in the people's minds a sense of horror, a queen guilty of incest, shattering every moral code, deserving of death. The trial of Anne and George was held publicly, but in reality, it was nothing more than a staged performance. George, a witty and intelligent man who had been his sister's right hand in consolidating the Boleyn family's power at court, was now turned into living proof of Anne's depravity. Standing before the tribunal, George vehemently denied the charges, but false witnesses and vague testimonies were enough to seal his fate. What is notable is that the entire case was built on baseless rumours. Some accounts suggest that when Henry lost interest in Anne, he believed, or wanted to believe, that she had betrayed him. Cromwell understood that all he needed was a sufficiently grotesque story of incest, and the people would feel no sympathy for the Queen. Indeed, the The crowd at that time did not see Anne as a victim, but as a monster to be eliminated. Modern historians unanimously agree that this accusation was fabricated. Anne and George were close in politics, often appearing together, and their closeness was twisted by enemies into evidence of a forbidden relationship. But even though it was a lie, the sentence was carried out. Both Anne and George were convicted of treason and executed. The tragedy here was not only the death of a queen, but also the destruction of an entire family. The Boleyns had risen from the ranks of the gentry to the pinnacle of power through Anne, but within just a few days, everything collapsed, and their family became a living example of the saying, "When the court wishes to find guilt, there will never be a shortage of evidence." The accusation of incest with George Boleyn is the clearest proof of the cruelty of Tudor politics, when a woman no longer had value. Her body, her honour, and even her own blood ties could be turned into weapons of destruction. Fact 4: Death by the sword. A gruesome mercy for a queen. On May 19th, 1536. The execution yard in the Tower of London was steeped in heavy silence. Crowds pressed together, some curious, some gloating, all awaiting the moment when a Queen of England would kneel before the blade. It was an unprecedented sight. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had driven Henry VIII to break with the Pope, now reduced to a prisoner, condemned for treason, incest, and adultery. Normally, in England, noble criminals were beheaded with a heavy axe, but everyone knew the axe was not always precise. Some executions dragged on with multiple blows, the head and body mangled amid the screams of the crowd. With Henry VIII, although he had betrayed and hated Anne, he still wished to grant her a strange mercy. He summoned an executioner from France, armed with a long, slender, and razor-sharp sword, to dispatch Anne in a single, decisive stroke. Perhaps deep down, Henry wanted to preserve some last shred of dignity for the woman he had once loved passionately. But perhaps it was also a display of power to show all of Europe that even in execution, he could bestow mercy at his will. When Anne stepped onto the scaffold, she surprised everyone. She did not scream or rage, but appeared with elegance, wearing a grey gown and a black silk cap. Before the crowd, she spoke in a trembling yet steady voice, praising Henry VIII as a merciful prince and praying for him. It was not heartfelt, but political convention. Every condemned prisoner was required to profess loyalty to the king, lest their family be punished. The French executioner, a master of the sword, was ready. As Eneknit, he did not use the English chopping block, but instead signalled for her to look forward, as if awaiting a token. Before she could turn back, the blade flashed in the cold sunlight, and in an instant her head fell, crimson blood spurting across the wooden platform. It all happened in seconds, swift, clean, and terrifying. Some claimed it was the most humane death possible in the brutal world of the Tudors, but the truth was harsher. This very mercy turned the execution into a flawless piece of political theatre. The crowd did not witness the bloody thrashing of a criminal, but rather the erasure of a queen, silent and neat, as though she had never existed. Before the blood had even dried, Anne's body was hastily stuffed into a crude wooden box, said to be an old arrow chest, and buried quickly in a nearby chapel. No grand coffin. No royal funeral. Only a cold ending for the woman who had once shaken the throne. Anne Boleyn's death by the sword became one of the most famous executions in European history. It serves as a reminder even the mercy of power can be a form of cruelty. For in the glint of that sword, it was not only the blood of a queen that fell, but also the end of a dream. The dream that love could change a kingdom. Fact 5. Failing to bear a prince, but giving birth to a legendary queen. One of the main reasons Anne Boleyn was sent to the scaffold was her failure to produce a male heir. For Henry VIII, his greatest obsession was to have a son who would secure the Tudor dynasty. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, had been pregnant many times, but most of the children died young. When Anne entered Henry's life, the king believed she was the one chosen by God to give him a son, yet fate was cruel. In the year 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. While Anne rejoiced, Henry's disappointment was plain. He reportedly said, "God has given me a daughter. Next time it will surely be a son." But that hope quickly faded. Anne's subsequent pregnancies all ended in miscarriage, and one was even recorded as a stillborn boy. In the politically charged atmosphere, this failure became a mortal wound. Anne's enemies seized upon it immediately. She is punished by God. She can only bear daughters. She is a curse upon the Tudor dynasty. Even Henry began to believe that his marriage to Anne was a mistake. The passion of earlier days turned to coldness, then to hatred. From there, Anne's path to the scaffold was only a matter of time. Yet history mocked in an unexpected way. The little girl Elizabeth, the child once deemed a failure, would grow up to become Elizabeth I. One of the longest reigning and most glorious monarchs of England, her reign became known as the Elizabethan Golden Age, a time when Shakespeare brought English literature to greatness. The English navy defeated the Spanish Armada, and England entered an era of global power. While Henry and his court cared only for a prince, Elizabeth proved that leadership did not depend on gender. Ironically, the woman destroyed for not being able to bear a son was the mother of a great queen who inscribed her name into world history. In the Tudor court, many must have later whispered bitterly if Henry had known the future. He would never have sent Anne Boleyn to the scaffold. For Anne's death was not only a personal tragedy, but also a paradox of history. The dynasty that rejected her for being worthless was shaped and glorified by her very bloodline. Elizabeth I rarely mentioned her mother. That silence was a political shield, as Anne's honour remained smeared for many years after her death. Yet in small traces, one can see Elizabeth kept a flame alive. She wore a ring engraved with her mother's portrait, and on several occasions expressed pride in her Tudor Boleyn heritage. It is a truth both tragic and magnificent. Anne Boleyn was destroyed for not producing a prince. Yet the daughter once scorned proved that true worth does not lie in prejudice, but in what one leaves behind for the world. Anne Boleyn was a living paradox in the history of England. On one hand, she was an ambitious, sharp, and alluring woman who made Henry VIII change the very religion of the kingdom just to marry her. But on the other hand, she was buried beneath the ashes of rumours, vile accusations, and a cold death sentence. From bizarre rumours about her body, an extra finger, 3 breasts, to the charge of incestuous adultery with her own brother. From the joy of giving birth to a little princess, to the icy sword stroke of a French executioner, Anne experienced every extreme of power and destruction. And ironically, the very daughter once scorned would become Elizabeth I, the legendary queen who led England into its golden age. The story of Anne Boleyn is not merely a personal tragedy, but proof of the cruelty of history, where power, love, and desire could raise a woman to the throne, and then, in a single instant, strike her down to the scaffold. More than 4 centuries have passed, yet the name Anne Boleyn still echoes, not only as a destroyed queen, but as a symbol of both the strength and fragility of women in a world ruled by men, a world where their bodies, their honour, and even their lives could be turned into political tools. And perhaps, when speaking of Anne Boleyn, what haunts posterity most is not the gruesome rumours or the unjust death sentence, but the truth she changed history. Yet history showed her no mercy.